Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome to RAU'S IAS DNS session. We are going to have a discussion on today's newspaper, The Hindu, Delhi edition, dated January 28, 2022. We shall pick up articles important for civil service examination and discuss them as per the demand of the exam. This is an editorial article from page number 6, Open the Schools. This article recognizes the threat that coronavirus is presently putting up, and the state administration has decided to continue with the lockdown norms. But in the same breath, the article also talks about as to why it is so important that schools reopen and students start going to schools. Recently, you must also have heard the comments of political scientists and sociologists and eminent people like Raghuram Rajan that if children don't go back to school sooner, we'll have a lost generation. In this context, let's have a discussion as to why it's important for children to go back to schools and what do children gather during their time spent at schools, and what in general is the promise of education. You see, a few years back, France made the mandatory school starting age down from 6 years to 3 years. They have the provision of compulsory schooling now from 3 to 16 years of age. And do you know why they did it? This reform in France was brought to boost equality, to improve the ability of children from disadvantaged backgrounds to remain competitive in education system. Because for most children, the cognitive skills and also the socio-behavioral skills they develop through primary and secondary education. This also has been highlighted by economic survey that the architecture of the brain of a child, it gets formed from the prenatal period to the age of 5 years. And so this is an important stage for developing cognitive and socio-behavioral skills. During this period, the brain's ability to learn from experience is at its highest level. Experiences and learning during this period directly affect achievements in adulthood. If this window is missed, building skills become harder, and that may result in a lost generation. It also has been pointed out in various research works, also in the World Development Report of World Bank, that the most effective way to acquire the skills demanded by the changing nature of work is to start early. The nature of work in the economic sector has been changing recently. From the traditional agricultural, industrial, and service sectors, things are moving towards artificial intelligence, designing, coding, 3D printing, e-commerce, behavioral research, personality development training, and so hence and so forth. The adaptability towards changing nature of work will be higher if the student gets into schooling early. So there has to be early investment in nutrition, health, social protection, and education to lay strong foundation for the future acquisition of cognitive and socio-behavioral skills. If you have been reading economic survey regularly, you must have read that educating individuals leads to more control over their life, control over what they want to pursue. And this is termed as agency. The increased agency manifests itself as a reduction in risky behavior. According to the World Bank researches done in countries like Jamaica, Nigeria, Mexico, it has been seen that 1 year of schooling reduces the risk of socially unacceptable behavior to a large extent. Education also improves in a better manner the agency of females. As for fertility, education reduces teen pregnancy and increases the control that women have over the size of their families. In absence of preliminary, even basic foundational primary education, poverty is transmitted from one generation to another. Because a child's ability to benefit from education is shaped by their parents' education, and better educated mothers raise healthier and more educated children. These are beyond doubt and has been shown by many normative studies. As we have discussed earlier, that in the changing environment, education benefits are most fruitfully realized. Individuals with better skills, better know-how can take more advantage of new technologies and adopt to the changing work. One of the most famous examples you must have heard and read about was during the time of Green Revolution. The returns to primary education were seen to be huge. The more educated farmers were adopting and diffusing new technologies in their field, in their process of production and marketing everywhere. So just the primary education helped better implement Green Revolution in India. Similarly, you might have heard that when NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, was signed, it increased the labor productivity in Mexico. but the benefits were concentrated among more skilled and educated workers in the richer northern states. More generally, you would understand that globalization and advances in technology are putting a premium on education and skill. It requires more cognitive and socio emotional skills, and these skills develop better in primary education. So, missing the primary schools could result in missing on entire generation. The economic growth of the nation that comes from human capital, and human capital develops from school education. One of the father of labor economics quantified the payoffs coming from work and school. Jacob Mincer, he proved that earnings differentials are influenced by human capital investment that grow over the life cycle, initially in school and later at work. Mincer did many research work in America, and he showed that for white males in non-farm wage jobs, an additional year of education increases earning by 10.7%. In Netherlands and Sweden, one additional year of work raises wages by 5.5%. There has been many economic researches done on East Asian miracle countries, and in particular these researchers flags that primary education, secondary education, and in general development of human capital were an important factor in their rapid growth. Primary education is moreover so important that it helps developing civic agency. Civic agency meaning high level of political engagement, trust, and tolerance. These are essential components that can be created through primary education to create the building blocks for more inclusive institutions and society. Civic agency helps realize the values of citizenship. It helps bring fraternity, cohesion, social capital in society. Civic agency is extremely important for a life with interdependency. And you had a quotation of Erik Erikson in this year mains examination that life without interdependency is not worth living. Interdependency, tolerance for each other's, realizing the rights of others and fulfilling one's duties accordingly, that is important, and that comes from civic agency. Civic agency is mostly developed at school. When children sit in a classroom environment, participate in schooling, in project works, in fields, in sports, in dramas, and other competitions, and they work cohesively as one unit, coming from different strata of societies, different religion, different caste, different community, different region, and they learn to grow with differences. They develop friendship and accept the differences so that in life they can even celebrate the differences. This civic agency is also very important for political mobilization, for political reforms. It has been observed that the school-based management programs where parents are also involved, it becomes a success. But it becomes success only when parents themselves are educated. The values of citizenship, of political engagement, participation in the process of governance, maybe through RTI, maybe through social capital, they come with civic agency that develops in schools and institutions later on, but the seed of it and much of the grooming is done early in schooling. The emotional growth of students in developing values of tolerance, empathy, compassion, that also take place early in life. Social interaction that children have that develops the technique of persuasion and living with differences that also happens in the environment of school where diversity is higher. And with skills and civic agency, social mobility within nation, whether for the purpose of economic or political or social, becomes easy. The promise of education is actually very, very high, but a large part of it is in the primary education. So the sentiment expressed in the editorial article that schools must reopen because now we are well acquainted with the precautionary measures and large percentage of students are also vaccinated. So we have to think seriously as to how to run the primary and secondary education during the time of pandemic. There is an article on the business page, Bonds and Rupee Weaken as Fed Tone Sparks Outflow Concerns. Indian bond yield has spiked and the rupee has struck the lowest in the last 1 month. Increase in bond yield is not a good news. These developments have happened because of the concern of potential outflows after Federal Reserve delivered a more hawkish than expected update. In this regard, let's have a discussion as to what is the relation between the Federal Reserve's hawkish stand and in general discussion on bond yields.
Very simplistically, bond yield is basically the return that investor get on the bond he is holding. For example, suppose an investor bought certain unit of bonds, rupees 100 each. The interest rate on the bond is 5%. Bond yield is basically the annual return. In this case, he is going to get rupees 5 every year on an investment of rupees 100. Bond yield in this case is 5%. But we are dealing with an issue of rise in bond yield. When will bond yield rise? Bond yield, you understand, will rise if the bond price in the secondary market that decreases. The interest that has been offered on the bond, that is not going to change after the bond has been issued. But when the bond keeps changing hands in the primary and secondary market, bond price changes. Suppose the investor who bought the bond at rupees 100 is going to sell it at a lower price. Let's say rupees 99. The person who is going to buy this bond at rupees 99 will still get the same interest rate, which is rupees 5. But the bond price for him is only 99. So the bond yield for him will be more than 5%, 5.05%. Similarly, if the person sells the bond at higher price, and suppose there are buyers for that. Suppose he sold the bond, same bond at rupees 101. Then in this case, the bond price has increased, so the bond yield will decrease. In this case, it will decrease to 4.95%. Bond price, like price of any other commodity, depends on demand and supply. If more people are willing to buy the bond price will increase. Why more people will be willing to buy the bond? Bond issued by government are safe because government are least likely to default. And bond issued by US government is the safest. But when the risk will be less, reward will also be less. The interest return on the bond issued by US government, very less. But if suppose the economy is all loomy-doomy, then the investors will be looking for safe investment. In that case, they will be running for bonds issued by US government or other governments with high credit rating. So in the secondary market, they will be willing to buy the government securities, bonds issued by government. The price of the bond will increase, but still they'll get certain return. Lower interest, but that will be the safe investment. If the economy is loomy-doomy, it is better to get somewhat lesser return, but to have a safe investment. Now imagine a scenario when economy has improved. The prospect looks better in startups, it looks better in corporates, it looks better in real estate. Then the investors will now try to get into those sectors. So they will try to get their money liquidated from the US bond market or the bond issued by other governments. In order to liquidate your money, you'll have to sell it at somewhat lower price to incentivize the buyer. So if you are willing to go away, you are decreasing the bond price and you are increasing the bond yield. And why are you willing to go away? Because you are looking better prospect in the economy elsewhere. So what does bond yield rise mean? It means a better economic prospect. Either the economy has come back on track or there is a big plan to bring the economy back on track. For example, the monetary policy of the central bank is such that they are going to cut the interest rate. That means they are going to pump in money in the economy to revive the economic growth. Then based on that expectation, the investors will get their money moved from the government bond into other areas of economy that will offer higher return. So one part of this link we have understood. If the central bank, the Fed, is adopting dovish policy, that means they are lowering the interest rate, then the bond yield is bound to rise. Now let's talk about as to what is the link between rising bond yield and negative effect on the equity market. See, if the bond yield is increasing, then two things will happen. Few people will take their money away from bond yield elsewhere in the economy. Maybe now they'll act as venture capitalist or angel investor, or they'll invest in real estate, give money to corporates otherwise through corporate bond where the return is higher, or whatever they want to. But definitely money is going to go away from the government security, government issued bond. But at the same time, the market will also try to correct itself. Since the bond yield is increasing, meaning the bond price is decreasing, if you buy the bond at lower price, your return will increase. And what more can you ask for? If you are getting higher return and at the same time zero risk, almost zero risk. US government bonds are considered to be the safest. US government is considered to be least likely to default. So if you are getting higher return on the safest investment, then money will start flowing in. where the money will come from. One area from where money can fly in to bond market is from the equity market, the share market. In the share market, you buy shares of company, both private and public sector. The return there is often higher than the government issued bond. But when the return seems to be higher in the government issued bond, then for some investor, it will be more attractive to bring money from the equity market to the bond market. Additionally, as we have talked about, the very reason why bond yields started to increase was better economic prospect. So if foreign institutional investors now see better economic prospect in their own economy, then they are going to take away the money from Indian market, mostly the equity market, to invest back home.
There is an article on page number 6, India's Economy and the Challenge of Informality. Informal sector basically means the sector, the employment, the work condition, employer, company, which are not registered. And the other marker of informality is absence of social security measures for the workers. Informality globally has remarkably remained stable despite economic growth or changing nature of work. For example, in Peru, despite all attention focused on it since 1980s, informality has remained constant at about 75%. In the sub-Saharan Africa, informality has remained almost constant in last 40 years at around 75% again. Globally, according to International Labour Organization, informality has been hovering around 60%. The number for India is quite high, it is around 90%. Informality is a systemic problem of global economy and more so in South Asia and especially in the context of India. It's systemically there in our economy and it predates the new millennium wave of technological change. Technology has not been able to bring much change in the informal sector. Informal sector is very slow to change. Since 1999, India has seen its information technology sector boom. It has become a nuclear power. It has broken the world record in the number of satellites launched into the outer space using a single rocket. And it has achieved the annual growth rate of around 7 to 8% in the last decade. Yet, the size of informal sector has remained at around 90%. The focus on informality of the economy was brought to the fore in around 1980s, and this was triggered by the work of Hernando de Soto. His book, The Other Path: The Economic Answer to Terrorism, discusses in detail the underground informal sector that was operating in the Peruvian economy and the toll that it was taking on the nation. But this has yielded limited result as we have just discussed that since 1980s the Peruvian economy is having the informal sector at almost the constant rate of 75%. The reason is erroneous regulations, taxes, social protection schemes are either not properly formulated or they are ill implemented. And all these gives businesses no incentive to grow. Informality has been discussed extensively in the economic literature since 1990s. It's extremely important that the economy of any nation shifts from the informal sector progressively towards the formal sector. The reasons are many. See, the returns to experience of a worker are higher, much higher in the formal sector compared to the informal sector. For example, a year spent in the informal sector in Kenya raises the income only by 2.7% a year. By contrast, workers in the formal sector in Kenya raises their income by about 4.1% every year, which is approximately 1.5 times higher than the incomes in the informal sector. This data is from the World Bank's report, World Development Report. Creating formal jobs is the best policy, consistent with the International Labour Organization's decent work agenda. Creating formal job is the best policy to seize the benefit of technological change. As we have discussed succinctly earlier, that informal sector is very slow to technological change. After the technological boom in the new millennia, the informal sector more or less remain the same. So, for technological absorption to increase the efficiency, it's important that the economy is switched towards formal sector. Concerning International Labour Organization's decent work agenda, it's important that the economy switches towards formal sector because the informal sector has inadequate safety and health standards. Most industries, especially mining, have inadequate safety and health standards. Environmental hazards are common in the informal sector. Irregularities in minimum wages is also a chief characteristic of informal sector. Most of the studies on conditions of employment in the unorganized sector that have examined the wage levels and earnings of workers, they have identified that the daily wages are below the minimum rate of wages. And the minimum wage state to state varies, and that accelerates the migration process. The working condition is not good, the working hours are not fixed. The threat to slide into poverty in informal sector is much high. Workers in the unorganized sector have a much higher incidence of poverty than their counterparts in the organized sector. Due to low level of income and uncertain employment in the unorganized sector, the workers are unable to meet their basic necessities and other social and cultural responsibilities. One of the chief characteristics of informal sector is the absence of social security measures. And in the time of uncertainty or some medical emergency, there is no risk coverage. There is nothing to ensure maintenance of basic living standards because of absence of social security measures. Switching from informal sector towards formal sector is also a question of social contract. We have to rethink the social contract, and that is centered on larger investment in human capital and progressively providing universal social protection. Having social protection is part of social contract for any citizen. If there is no social protection, which is the case in the case of informal sector, that means that the social contract is not getting enforced considerably. And when social protection is established, then the labor flexibility is higher. Labor regulation eases work transition. Labor force will be better able to adapt to the changing nature of work. Concerning social contract, you must also understand and know that a number of directive principles of state policy relating to aspects of social security were incorporated in the Indian Constitution. And hence, the legal initiatives like Employees State Insurance Act, the Minimum Wage Act of 1948, the Coal Mines Provident Fund Act of 1948, the Employees Provident Fund Act of 1952, and the Maternity Benefit Act as amended lately, all these welfare measures have seen the light of the day. It's not just an economic question, it's a political question, a social question, a moral question of transiting the labor force from the informal sector to formal sector. So, must the informality be reduced? The question is how? The most powerful way of reducing informality is to invest in human capital. Investments in human capital can reduce informal employment. When young people are equipped with right skills, they are more likely to obtain a formal job. Investing in human capital, particularly in early childhood education, to develop higher order cognitive and socio behavioral skills in addition to foundational skills will increase the adaptability of the child later when he participates in the labor force. To take care of the need for skills of workers in the informal economy, or the skill development program can be run later in a retrofitting manner. To take care of the need for skills of workers in the informal economy, the Government of India has started various programs like Skill India Mission, Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, Deen Dayal Upadhyaya Gramin Kaushal Yojana, and recognition of prior learning schemes like these. As we have observed earlier, that poverty begets poverty. The learning outcome when the family is poor is also poor. Government of India has initiated several poverty related development schemes which indirectly benefit the urban informal sector like Nehru Rozgar Yojana, Manrega, Swarn Jayanti Shahri Rozgar Yojana. These were launched to provide support to the poor who constitute bulk of the informal sector. Similarly, to provide social security, the Parliament enacted the Unorganized Workers Social Security Act 2008. Government also has launched Atal Pension Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Suraksha Bima Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Jyoti Bima Yojana, Rashtra Swasth Bima Yojana, etc., concerning social security. And to be able to provide for these, government needs to create fiscal space for public financing of human capital development and social protection. Apart from these policy, legislative, and administrative measures, there is need for improvement in infrastructure, especially in towns and villages. Improved infrastructure in towns and villages could encourage formal firms to establish themselves near poor workers. There must be affordable access to internet. And equally important are more investments in roads, ports, and municipal infrastructure on which firms, governments, and individuals rely to exploit technologies to their full potential. Talking of which, the use of technology in the form of e-governance, etc., in the form of e-governance have to be increased. We were discussing about Peruvian economy earlier. The introduction of e-payroll in early 2000s was responsible for reduction of non-agricultural informal employment in Peru from 75% to 68% in 2012. It always has been stressed concerning the informal economy in India and elsewhere that there has to be optimum regulation. Over regulation does not allow the firms to grow big, it dwarfs the firm. Countries that more heavily regulate their businesses have larger unofficial economies. Mexico is one good example of what happens when a country streamlines its business regulations. In 2002, Mexico began its Rapid Business Opening System. The program simplified local business registration procedures and reduced the average number of days it takes to register a business from 30 to 2, the number of required procedures from 8 to 3, and the number of office visits required to register a business from 4 to 1. The Federal Commission for Improving Regulation organized the reform coordination with municipal governments because many business regulation procedures are set locally. Because of these reforms, informal business owners who were similar to profile to formal wage workers were 25% more likely to move into formal employment. The evidence suggests that easing regulation encourages the transition from informal firm ownership to formal wage jobs. Similar is the story in India concerning ease of doing business reform. When red carpet is rolled for business bodies rather than red tapeism, with eased regulation and many self-regulation in case of pollutions, etc., especially for startups, regularization of firms have increased. There is an article on page number 1. Central Asia Meet forms Afghan group. India has concluded the first India Central Asia Summit. Previously, India used to have dialogues with Central Asia, but this was the first summit between India and Central Asia. And it has been decided to establish a joint working group on Afghanistan. The summit also discussed various other aspects like terrorism and counter-terrorism measures, trade-related measures, and infrastructure projects like TAPI and INSTC. The details of India and Central Asia relation has been discussed in the DNS dated 21st December 2021. There hasn't been any concrete measures to be offered in the news article. You have to know the basics of India and Central Asia relation, and that has been covered recently in this DNS, just in case you need the reference. Now you have in front of you question for the day. For more practice, you can also attempt the DNS quiz on the ELEARN platform. Goodbye. Take care.